On the evening of the 7th of October 1966, a brand new Dodge Polaris station wagon idled at the seaward gate of an oceanfront estate in Newport, Rhode Island. The driver was a woman in pearls. The man kneeling at the latch was the closest friend she had ever had. She had inherited $80 million at the age of 12. The newspapers called her the richest little girl in the world. She would die alone, 79 years old, in a Beverly Hills bedroom, surrounded by people her own lawyers did not recognize. How does a woman with 5 mansions, 3 yachts and a private jet finish her life unable to name a single person who loves her? And how does the man kneeling at that gate, her companion for 13 years, end his life crushed beneath the front wheels of her car? Her name was Doris Duke. The fortune she inherited in 1925, adjusted for inflation, is worth more than $1.5 billion today. It came from American Tobacco, North Carolina Hydroelectric Power, and the founding endowment of Duke University. By the time she was a teenager, she could outspend any private citizen on earth. In the next 40 minutes, you will learn 3 things the Duke family spent 54 years trying to bury. The exact words she said to a Newport policeman before midnight on October 7th, the contents of a manila folder her butler carried out of her bedroom the night she died. And what the Newport Police Department concluded in 2020, when they finally reopened the case after half a century of silence. This is not a story about wealth. It is a story about what wealth does to a child who is never told the word no. Hold one image in your mind. A black and white photograph taken at sunrise on the 8th of October 1966 by a Newport Daily News photographer. A bent, wrought iron gate, a dark stain on the gravel. Remember it. We will return to it. In April of 1865, Washington Duke walked home from the Civil War with 2 blind mules and 50 cents in Confederate silver. His farm in Orange County, North Carolina, had been stripped by Sherman's army. The only thing left in the barn was leaf tobacco, too coarse to sell, too plentiful to throw away. He told his 3 sons they would hand-roll it themselves by candlelight on the floor of the barn. The youngest son was 9 years old. They called him Buck. Buck Duke learned to count by counting tobacco leaves. He learned arithmetic by weighing them. By 15, he was running the family's roll-it-yourself operation. By 25, he had bought out the neighbors. By 30, he had bought out his rivals. By 44, he controlled 90% of the American tobacco trade through the American Tobacco Company. He had also figured out something none of his competitors understood, that machines could roll cigarettes 150 times faster than human hands, and that whoever controlled the machine would control the century. He was correct. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court dissolved his monopoly under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Buck Duke became richer. The 4 spin-off companies, American Tobacco, R.J. Reynolds, Liggett and Myers, and P. Lorillard, were each worth more apart than they had been together, and Buck owned a controlling stake in all of them. But the scene that defines Buck Duke's psychology is not the rise. It is a quiet morning in 1923 at Duke Farms, his 2,700-acre estate in Hillsborough, New Jersey. He is standing on the bank of one of the 11 ornamental lakes he has commissioned. He turns to his architect, Horace Trumbauer, and says he wants the lakes dug 3 feet deeper than the plans require. Trumbauer asks why. "So no man," Duke answers, "can drown in them by accident." 2 years later, in October 1925, Buck Duke is dying of pneumonia in his Manhattan study at 1 East 78th Street. He calls his only living child to his bedside. She is 12 years old. She has long blonde hair and her mother's distant grey eyes. He does not tell her he loves her. He does not tell her to be brave. He says 3 words. She will repeat them, in private letters, for the next 68 years. Trust no one. Then, he hands her a folded piece of paper. We will not open it until minute 36. 3 months before Buck Duke's death, on the 11th of December 1924, he had signed the deed of trust that created the Duke Endowment, $40 million. The equivalent of $720 million today. It was the largest single charitable gift in American history at the time. The bulk of it went to a small Methodist college in Durham, North Carolina, which agreed as a condition of the gift to change its name. Trinity College became Duke University. He had been preparing the estate for years. The American tobacco fortune was already public. The Duke power fortune was less so. Beginning in 1905, Buck had begun damming the Catawba River, which runs from western North Carolina down through South Carolina. By 1925, he controlled the largest privately owned hydroelectric grid in the American South. The Carolinas, in effect, paid Buck Duke for their lights. When the will was read on the 12th of October 1925, the numbers stunned even the New York papers. Doris received outright approximately $12 million in cash and securities. She received in trust an estimated $68 million more, scheduled to vest at age 21 and again at 30. She received the Manhattan Mansion at 1 East 78th, the Duke Farms estate in New Jersey, and a 1/3 undivided interest in the Newport, Rhode Island property called Rough Point, which her mother Nanaline retained as her residence. She was 12. The press predictably lost its mind. The New York Daily News, on the 13th of October 1925, richest little girl in the world. The phrase stuck. By the end of the decade, it appeared in every English-language newspaper that mentioned her, and they all mentioned her. Photographers stationed themselves outside the Manhattan Mansion. Strangers wrote her letters proposing marriage. By 1932, the FBI was tracking 3 separate kidnapping plots against her. Inside the mansion, 50 servants moved through the marble corridors. Doris ate dinner alone in a dining room designed for 40. Her mother, Nanaline Holt, Inman Duke Buck's second wife, 21 years his junior, a woman the press called the Iceberg, saw her daughter, by Mansfield's count, on average 11 minutes per day. Doris was tutored at home. She grew. By 13 she was 6 feet tall. By 15 she was speaking 3 languages. By 17 she was the heiress. Every European title without a fortune wanted to marry, and she had already learned to despise them all. She was waiting for her 21st birthday. The day the first trust would vest. The day she would, for the first time in her life, be answerable to no one. It came on the 22nd of November, 1933. She turned 21 in Manhattan. $12 million vested in her name on the morning of that birthday. She fired 3 of her father's lawyers by lunchtime. 2 years later, on the 13th of February 1935, she married James Henry Roberts Cromwell at her mother's Park Avenue apartment. The bridegroom was the son of Eva Stotesbury, the Philadelphia hostess. The New York Times called the wedding the social event of the decade. She wore a crown of white orchids. He wore tails. The honeymoon was a 13-month round-the-world trip aboard a chartered Cunard liner. In Hawaii, she fell in love with Black Point on the southeastern shore of Oahu. She bought 5 oceanfront acres and began building Shangri-La, a private estate of cream limestone, Persian tilework, and Mughal courtyards that would take 5 years to complete. In Egypt, she walked alone into the unsealed antechamber of the tomb of Tutankhamun. Howard Carter himself, by his diary's own account, found her there. In India, the Maharaja of Jaipur gave her a set of saris embroidered with rubies the size of pigeon eggs. She came home in March of 1936. She bought Falcon's Lair in Beverly Hills, Rudolph Valentino's old house, sold by his estate in 1934. She bought a 2,700-acre estate to add to Duke Farms. She inherited Rough Point outright on her mother's death rights renegotiation. 5 mansions. She was 23. A 1,939 Cecil Beaton photograph in Vogue. She is dressed in black silk. She is staring directly at the lens. She is not smiling. Look closely at the Beaton photograph. The smile is not there. There is a reason. By the time Beaton's shutter closed, Doris had already begun keeping a private diary that her biographer Sally Bingham would not be permitted to read until 2014. In it, she had written in October of 1937, 18 months into her marriage, that her husband Jimmy Cromwell treats me as a checkbook with a wedding ring attached. Cromwell had begun spending her money on his political ambitions. He ran for Senate in New Jersey. He campaigned for the ambassadorship to Canada and received it in 1940. The campaign expenses, the entertainment, the apartments in Ottawa and Washington all paid from her trust. She was already preparing to leave him. She had begun a correspondence with a 30-year-old British war correspondent named Alec Cunningham Reid. By 1942, that correspondence would become the first of 17 documented affairs. The smile is not there because she has already learned what her father told her at 12. Trust no one. And she has already concluded at 26 that the rule applies inside her own marriage. But in July of 1940, Doris Duke will discover that trust no one is not a strategy. It is a sentence. A child is coming, a daughter. She will hold the child for exactly 24 hours. And the loss of that child will set in motion every decision Doris Duke makes for the next 53 years, including the decision she will make alone in the driver's seat of a Dodge Polara on a wet gravel driveway in Newport on the evening of the 7th of October 1966. In the autumn of 1939, Doris is 26 years old, 4 months pregnant, and by every public measure at the high tide of her life. The Cromwell marriage has on the surface recovered. Jimmy has been nominated as the United States Minister to Canada. The Senate confirms him in February 1940. The newspapers describe Doris as the radiant Mrs. Cromwell, soon to be a mother. She poses for one photograph with her hand resting on her stomach in a tea-length dress. The image runs in life on the 8th of April 1940. She has begun decorating a nursery on the 3rd floor of the Manhattan mansion. The walls are painted pale yellow. A French cradle is shipped from a Paris auction house. Nanaline the iceberg sends a single telegram. Hope all is well. It arrives on her daughter's birthday and is the only message Doris receives from her mother that month. She tells her closest friend at the time, the Hawaiian heiress Alice Spaulding, that she is going to give the baby a name no one in either family has used. Something that does not carry a fortune. Something that belongs only to the child. She picks the name Arden. In late June, her doctors at Manhattan's Doctors' Hospital order her to bed rest. Her blood pressure is climbing. She moves into a private suite on the 7th floor. Jimmy is in Ottawa. Nanaline is at Rough Point. The servants come and go. Doris reads, alone, for 10 days. The audience reading this, and the audience watching 40 minutes of cinematic footage, has, by this point, relaxed. The dynasty is consolidating. An heir is coming. The pieces are aligning. This is the moment of greatest narrative danger. This is when the master prompt instructs the writer, strike. On the night of the 10th of July, 1940, the contractions begin 2 months early. She is moved from the 7th floor suite to the obstetrical theatre. The chief obstetrician, Dr. James A. Harrar, attempts a forced delivery. The labor lasts 11 hours. At 6:42 a.m., on the 11th of July 1940, a daughter is born by emergency caesarean section. She weighs 3 pounds, 4 ounces. The medical record, later subpoenaed in the 1995 probate proceedings, lists her as female infant Cromwell, live birth, premature, admit incubator. Doris does not see her daughter until 11 million that morning. She is wheeled into the nursery on a gurney. A nurse lifts the baby out of the incubator and places her briefly on Doris's chest. She is told later that her daughter's eyes were grey. The baby lives 24 hours and 20 minutes. She dies of complications from prematurity at 7:02 a.m. on the 12th of July 1940. Doris is told at 7:30. Her husband in Ottawa is told at 9 a.m. 2 days later, Dr. Harrar tells her flatly, with no buffer, that the caesarean had injured her uterus and that she will not be able to bear another child. She is 27 years old. She is, by current dollar estimates, worth approximately $140 million. She is, suddenly, the last Duke. The hospital release form is signed at 4:14 inches the afternoon on the 19th of July 1940. She walks out of Doctor's Hospital on her own legs. She does not speak in the car. She does not speak in the elevator. At the apartment, she goes into the nursery on the 3rd floor, the pale yellow nursery, the French cradle, and she closes the door. The staff hear nothing for 2 hours. When she comes out, she instructs the housekeeper to seal the room. The yellow paint is to be left untouched. The cradle is not to be moved. The door is not to be opened. It will remain sealed, by her standing instruction, for 53 years, until her own death in October 1993. For the rest of her life, By the autumn of 1966, Doris Duke is 53 years old. Eduardo Tirella has been at her side for 13 years. The relationship the world sees is impossible to categorize. He is not her lover, every credible source, including Pony Duke's family memoir and Bingham's 2020 biography, agrees that Eduardo's romantic life is exclusively with men, and that Doris knows this from the second month of their acquaintance. He is not her employee, exactly, though she pays him a salary of $48,000 a year, plus a suite at every one of her 5 houses. He is not her friend in the way friendships ordinarily work, because there is no equality. He is something for which mid-century American English does not have a word. Pony Duke, who as a teenager spent the summers of 1962, 1963, and 1964 at Rough Point, describes the dynamic in a single sentence in his memoir. Eduardo was the only person on earth who could tell my Aunt Doris she was wrong, and lived to tell the truth a second time. He talks back. He laughs at her. He tells her at a dinner party at Falcon's Lair in 1961, in front of Elizabeth Taylor, that her taste in jewelry is vulgar in a way that requires real money to achieve. She laughs so hard she spills champagne on a Manet. He redesigns Shangri-La's Mughal suite from memory after a single visit to the Red Fort in Delhi. He persuades her to donate her father's tobacco money paintings to the Honolulu Academy of Arts. He restores the Rose Garden at Rough Point in 3 colors, white, cream, and the palest of pinks, because he tells her that primary colors will fight the ocean. But by the summer of 1966, something has changed. Eduardo has begun spending longer stretches in California. He has been hired as the production designer for a new Tony Curtis comedy, Don't Make Waves. He has rented a small house in West Hollywood. In late July, he tells the painter Andy Warhol at a party at Ondine on East 59th Street that he is, quote, tired of being the most expensive houseboy in America. In early September, he signs a contract with MGM. The contract is for the production design of 3 films over 30 months. The salary is $110,000 per year. The contract requires him to be physically present in Los Angeles for at least 8 months annually. He flies to Newport on the 4th of October 1966 to tell Doris in person. He brings 2 suitcases. The 2020 Newport supplemental file confirms that one of them contained, among other items, a notarized copy of the MGM contract, a Los Angeles apartment lease dated the 1st of October 1966, and a handwritten list of items he intended to ship from Rough Point to California, including, by his own annotation, the Tang horse on the library mantel, a piece Doris had given him as a 35th birthday present in 1955. He intends to leave. He intends to leave the next day, the 7th of October, 1966. She knows. On the morning of the 7th of October, 1966, the staff at Rough Point note in the household log that Mrs. Duke and Mr. Tirella took breakfast together in the morning room at 9:14 a.m. The log, which survives in the Rough Point archives, now maintained by the Newport Restoration Foundation, records that Eduardo was observed by the parlor maid to be examining airline schedules. The 2 of them spend the morning walking the property. Eduardo wants to take photographs of the Rose Garden in autumn light for a portfolio he is preparing for the West Coast magazine Architectural Digest. At approximately 4:45 inches the afternoon, the household log records, Mrs. Duke requested the Polara from the garage. The Dodge Polara station wagon, a 1966 model, just over 2,000 miles on the odometer, dark green with a cream interior, is brought to the front portico by the chauffeur, Robert Walker. Walker hands the keys, by his own statement to Newport police on the 8th of October 1966, not to Doris, but to Eduardo. He notes that this is unusual but not unprecedented. Eduardo, when at Rough Point, often drove Doris on local errands. What follows is not in dispute. It is documented in the original 1966 police report, in 3 sworn witness statements, and confirmed independently by the 2020 supplemental investigation. Doris and Eduardo got into the Polara. Eduardo took the driver's seat. Doris took the passenger seat. They drove approximately 300 yards down the gravel driveway toward the heavy wrought iron gate that opened onto Bellevue Avenue. The gate was closed. In 1966, this gate could not be opened from inside the car. There was no electronic mechanism. A person had to physically dismount, walk to the gate, lift a heavy iron drop bar, and swing the gate open by hand. Eduardo stopped the car approximately 12 feet from the gate. He put the transmission into park. He left the engine running. He stepped out of the driver's side. He walked to the gate. Doris slid across the front bench seat into the driver's position. This is the moment the 1966 police investigation concluded was an accident. This is the moment the 2020 Newport supplemental file concludes was not. Eduardo bent over the iron drop bar. Doris put the Polara in drive. The car, according to the 2020 reconstruction performed by accident investigation consultants Daniel Vasquez and Albert Patalion, accelerated from a standstill to approximately 24 miles per hour over a distance of 15 feet. A rate of acceleration the consultants describe as consistent with a deliberate full throttle. Application, not consistent with an accidental foot slip from the brake to the accelerator. Eduardo turned at the sound. He had no time to move. The Polara struck him in the lower torso. It carried him through the wrought iron gate. The gate gave way. The car continued for an additional 49 feet across Bellevue Avenue, with Eduardo's body pinned beneath the front axle, before coming to rest against a stone retaining wall on the far side of the road. Eduardo Tirella was crushed beneath the engine block. He was 46 years old. The time was approximately 5:07 p.m. The bent, wrought iron gate, the dark stain on the gravel, the black and white photograph from the Newport Daily News on the morning of October 8th. You have been holding that image for 20 minutes. Now you know what made the stain. The first person to reach the scene was a Newport landscaper named Michael Lawler, who was driving north on Bellevue Avenue and saw the Polara come through the gate. He stopped his truck. He ran to the car. Doris Duke was sitting in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel. She was not crying. She was not bleeding. She had a small cut on her forehead from the impact with the windshield, but no other visible injury. She said, "To Lawler," and he repeated this in his the 8th of October 1966 statement, and again, verbatim, "To Peter Lance for the 2020 Vanity Fair investigation, I think I have done a terrible thing." Not, "I have had a terrible accident." Done. Lawler ran to the front of the car. He saw Eduardo. He told Doris not to move and ran to the nearest house, the Vanderbilt cottage, and asked the housekeeper to call the police. Newport patrolman Fred Newton arrived at 5:23 p.m. He was 29 years old. It was his 4th year on the force. What happens between 5:23 p.m. and midnight on the 7th of October 1966 is the heart of the case. The Newport Police Department reopened in 2020. By 5:35 p.m., Doris Duke had been driven back to Rough Point, not to a hospital, not to the police station by Newport Police Chief Joseph A. Radis, who had personally responded to the call. Chief Radis was, by 1966 records of the Newport City Council, a personal friend of Doris's. He had attended 3 dinners at Rough Point in the previous 2 years. By 6:15 p.m., Doris's personal physician, Dr. James Kingsley, had arrived at Rough Point. He administered, by his own later affidavit, a sedative dosage of sodium amytal intramuscular. This is significant. Sodium amytal renders a person legally incapable of giving a coherent statement. By 7 p.m., the Newport Hospital had received Eduardo's body and pronounced him dead on arrival. Cause of death: massive crush injuries to the chest and abdomen. By 9 p.m., the Duke family attorney from New York, Wesley Fack of the firm Cahill Gordon, had landed at the Newport airfield on a chartered Cessna. By 11 p.m., the press release had been drafted. It would appear in the Newport Daily News on the morning of October 8th. It described the death as a tragic accident in which Mrs. Doris Duke's vehicle, in low-speed maneuvering, unfortunately came into contact with her companion. Patrolman Fred Newton, who had been the first responding officer, was instructed by his supervising lieutenant, by Newton's own 2020 statement, to Peter Lance, to make the report short. The chief is handling this one. On the morning of the 8th of October 1966, Newport Police Chief Joseph Radis held a press briefing on the front steps of the Newport Police Station. He stated, "For the record, that the death of Eduardo Tirella was an unfortunate accident, and that the gas pedal of the vehicle had become temporarily stuck." He stated that no charges would be filed. The Polara was inspected by a Dodge mechanic from a Providence dealership on the 9th of October 1966. The mechanic's signed report stated that the gas pedal showed no defect, no obstruction, and operated normally in all positions. This report was filed in the Newport Police Evidence Room. It would not be re-examined until 2020. Doris Duke did not give a sworn statement to police. She was not interviewed at the station. She was never required to take a sobriety test, despite household staff later confirming she had consumed 2 glasses of wine at lunch. She was never charged with any offense. Within 72 hours, the case was closed. Remember what Eduardo Tirella was carrying in his suitcase on the 7th of October 1966? The MGM contract, the Los Angeles lease. The list of objects he intended to ship to California, including the tang horse Doris had given him in 1955, the 2020 Newport supplemental file establishes, from interviews with 3 former Rough Point staff members, that on the night of the 7th of October 1966, between 8 p.m. and midnight, while Doris was sedated upstairs and the police investigation was being managed downstairs by attorney Wesley Fach, both of Eduardo Tirella's suitcases were taken from the guest suite by the household butler, Reginald Jeffries. The contents were inventoried by Jeffries and Fach. The MGM contract, the Los Angeles lease, and the shipping list were removed from the suitcases and placed in a manila folder. That manila folder was carried by Jeffries to Doris's bedroom safe. It would not be opened again until the 28th of October, 1993, the night Doris Duke died, when her butler, Bernard Lafferty, removed it, along with several other documents, before the estate's executors arrived in the morning. The dark stain on the gravel, the bent wrought iron gate. They were not the consequences of an accident. They were the consequences of a decision Doris Duke made over the course of approximately 8 seconds when she understood, for the first time in 13 years, that the one human being who had ever told her no was about to leave her. In 2020, Newport Police Chief Ryan Duffy released a public statement on the supplemental investigation. The statement read in part, "Were this case to occur today, with the evidence now reviewed, it is the conclusion of this department that probable cause would exist to charge the driver with negligent homicide at minimum, and that a prosecutor could reasonably present the case to a grand jury for consideration of charges of murder in the second degree." Doris Duke had been dead for 27 years. In the immediate weeks after the 7th of October 1966, Doris Duke did not leave Rough Point. She did not attend Eduardo Tirella's funeral, which was held at St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church in Dover, New Jersey. On the 11th of October 1966, she sent a wreath of white roses. She sent a check, made out to Eduardo's brother Edmund, for $10,000. The check was returned uncashed, with a single sentence written on the envelope in Edmund Tirella's handwriting, "You owe him more than this." In 1971, Edmund Tirella filed a wrongful death suit against Doris Duke on behalf of Eduardo's estate in Newport County Superior Court. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, widely reported in the Providence Journal on the 4th of November, 1972, as in excess of $75,000, but less than $200,000. For the rest of her life, Doris would tell anyone who asked, and the few who dared, that Eduardo's death was the worst day of her life. In her diary, on the 7th of October 1968, the second anniversary, she wrote a single line, 2 years. He still has not forgiven me. I do not blame him. She had 27 years left to live. After the 7th of October 1966, Doris Duke does not stop. She accelerates. She flies to Shangri-La in Honolulu on the 12th of November, 1966. She stays for 4 months. She begins, for the first time in her life, to study Islamic art seriously. By 1968, she has acquired, through dealers in Tehran and Istanbul, more than 3,000 pieces of Persian, Mughal, and Ottoman ceramics, textiles, and architectural fragments. She redesigns the entire Mughal suite at Shangri-La as a memorial. She does not say to whom. The staff understand. In April 1968, she flies to Saigon. She is 55 years old. She is, by her own arrangement with the South Vietnamese government, granted observer status to tour American military hospitals. She spends 6 weeks in country. She files no dispatches. She tells no journalist she is there. The trip is documented only in her own private papers and in a single State Department cable, declassified in 2003, which describes Mrs. Duke's unannounced presence at the 3rd Field Hospital, Saigon. In 1970, she becomes improbably, and in secret, the principal financial backer of a small Hare Krishna temple in West Virginia called New Vrindaban. She visits twice. She donates, by Bingham's accounting, more than $3 million over the next 8 years. In 1972, at the age of 59, she goes to Beirut and studies belly dancing. There is a photograph of her in the costume taken by her own request, by a Lebanese photographer named Munir Hojaj, that has never been publicly published. Bingham describes it. Doris is laughing. It is the only photograph of Doris Duke laughing that survives from any year after 1966. In 1976, she becomes, briefly, a deacon of the Self-Realization Fellowship in Encinitas, California. In 1979, she begins flying twice a year to a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in northern Nepal. In 1985, she takes up jazz piano. She is 72. She practices 4 hours a day at Falcon's Lair. Her teacher, the bandleader Joe Castro, with whom she has, by then, had a 25-year on-and-off affair, tells Mansfield, in a 1991 interview, she was running. Every place we went, every instrument she picked up, every god she tried to find, she was running from the same room. The room, of course, was the yellow nursery on the 3rd floor of the Manhattan mansion. The room was the 8-second decision at the Rough Point gate. She could not outrun either one. In the summer of 1985, at a Hare Krishna festival in Hawaii, Doris Duke, now 72 years old, meets a 35-year-old woman named Charlene Gale Hefner. Hefner has changed her name to Chandi. She is the former girlfriend of one of New Vrindaban's senior monks. She is intelligent, soft-spoken, and, by every account, physically striking. She has long dark hair and grey eyes. The grey eyes matter. Doris becomes obsessed with her almost immediately. By December 1985, Chandi has moved into Falcon's Lair. By 1986, she has moved into Shangri-La. By 1987, Doris has begun introducing her, in private letters, as "my dear daughter." On the morning of the 28th of October, 1988, a date chosen, Doris's secretary, Colin Shanley, would later testify, because it was the closest available court date to the anniversary of the family that no longer existed, Doris Duke walked into a probate courthouse in Los Angeles County and legally adopted Chandi Hefner under the California Adult Adoption Statute. Chandi was 38 years old at the time. Doris was 75. The adoption made Chandi, under California and federal law, Doris's legal child. It made her, presumptively, an heir to the Duke fortune. It made her, in the cold technical language Buck Duke himself would have used, a beneficiary of trusts that Buck had drafted in 1924, specifically to vest only in Doris's issue. Lawful or adopted. Chandi, in 1988, became Doris's issue. The relationship lasted 3 years. The break came in 1991. The trigger, by Pony Duke's account, was a single conversation in which Chandi told Doris that she, Chandi, believed she was the reincarnation of Doris's daughter Arden, who had died in 1940. Doris stopped speaking to her that afternoon, By the end of the week, Chandi was barred from all 5 properties. By February 1992, Doris had executed a new will. The new will, drafted at Doris's bedside in Beverly Hills by attorneys James Burns and George Bisson, explicitly disinherited Chandi Hefner and stated, in language Doris dictated personally, "I have determined that my decision to adopt Chandi Hefner was a mistake." Chandi would litigate this for 6 years. The settlement, finalized in 1998, awarded her $65 million. But by 1991, Doris Duke was already dying. She had developed lymphedema in her legs. She had 2 hip replacements that year, both performed badly by a Beverly Hills surgeon who would later be sued by the estate for malpractice. She had begun taking Demerol, morphine, and Halcyon sometimes, by her medical records, all 3 on the same day. She was 80 years old. She weighed 82 pounds. She had not seen the yellow nursery in 51 years. She was about to make her final, fatal mistake. His name was Bernard Lafferty. He was 45 years old. He was an Irish-born former bartender from County Donegal who had previously worked as a personal assistant to Peggy Lee. He had been hired by Doris in 1987 on Peggy Lee's recommendation. He wore a single diamond stud in his left ear. He kept his hair in a long ponytail. He could not read or write more than his own name. By 1992, Lafferty controlled access to Doris Duke's bedroom. By early 1993, he had isolated her from her doctors of 40 years, her attorneys of 30 years, and her remaining family. He had hired a new physician, Dr. Charles Kivowitz, and new attorneys. He had dismissed the longtime housekeeper. On the 5th of April 1993, Doris Duke executed her final will. The will named Bernard Lafferty as a co-executor of her estate, alongside the United States Trust Company. It named him as the sole administrator of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, with a salary of $100,000 per month for life. It granted him, personally, $5 million and the right to remain at any of her residences for the rest of his life. She was 80 years old. She weighed 76 pounds. The will was witnessed by 2 members of her household staff, both of whom would later state under oath that they had not seen her read it. She died at Falcon's Lair in Beverly Hills at 5 a.m. on the 28th of October, 1993. The death certificate listed the cause as stroke complicated by pulmonary edema. October 28th. The same date, 27 years to the day that her divorce filing against Cromwell was first served in Reno in 1941. The same date, 5 years before, that she had walked into a Los Angeles probate court to adopt Chandi Hefner. The same date her father, Buck Duke, had been buried in 1925. Bernard Lafferty was the only person in the room. Remember the folded paper Buck Duke handed his 12-year-old daughter on his deathbed in 1925? Trust no one. The list of 11 names, the decades of midnight reading. The instruction had worked. Doris Duke had trusted no one, in the end. She also, in the end, had no one to trust. The bulk of her estate, approximately $1.3 billion, passed to the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. The foundation funds environmental conservation, the performing arts, child welfare, medical research, and Islamic art preservation. It still operates from offices in Manhattan. As of 2024, its endowment exceeds $2 billion. It is, by any measure, one of the most consequential private philanthropies in American history. It does not bear the name of any child. There are no children. The Duke line 3 generations from a barn in Orange County, North Carolina, in 1865, ended in a Beverly Hills bedroom on the 28th of October, 1993. 3 generations. 1 man builds, 1 woman inherits, 1 grave closes the line. This is not unique to the Dukes. It is the same arc that destroyed the Vanderbilts on the same Bellevue Avenue. It is the same arc that destroyed the Hartford grocery fortune 3 blocks west. It is the same arc that has destroyed roughly 70% of all multi-generational American fortunes since the Industrial Revolution, according to a 2017 study by the Williams Group, an estate planning research consortium. The pattern, when you strip away the names, is the same. The first generation builds the fortune through obsession, sacrifice, and risk. The second generation inherits the fortune and is given a single instruction: protect it. The third generation, raised inside the fortress, has no language for the world outside it. Buck Duke understood the first stage. He had no idea how to teach the second. His 3 words on his deathbed, "Trust no one," were not paternal advice. They were a survival manual written by a man who had himself survived by trusting no one. He gave his daughter the only weapon he knew. He did not understand that the weapon, used continuously for 68 years, would become the wound. Doris Duke trusted no one. She lost the only child she could conceive. She lost the only friend who told her the truth. She adopted, in desperation, a stranger she barely knew. And in the final months of her life, she handed the keys to her empire to a man who could not read. The richest girl in the world died by the sworn testimony of her own household staff, asking for a glass of water that no one brought her. What does the story of Doris Duke ultimately mean? It means that wealth, past a certain threshold, is not a multiplier of human experience. It is a substitute for it. The richest woman in America had 5 mansions and could not name a place she was at peace. She had 3 husbands and 17 documented affairs, and her diaries, which Bingham finally accessed in 2014, contain no entry in which she describes being loved. It means that the absence of constraint is not freedom. It is exile. Every person who told Doris Duke no her father in his 3 deathbed words, Eduardo Tirella in 13 Years of Laughter, the brief grey-eyed daughter who lived 24 hours, was eventually removed from her life by death or by her own hand. The world she built around herself was a world in which the answer to every question was yes. That world is not survivable. And it means, perhaps most importantly, that an inheritance without an instruction manual is a curse pretending to be a gift. Buck Duke gave his daughter $80 million at the age of 12. He did not give her, and could not give her, a reason to get out of bed. The fortune, for the next 68 years, was a question she was unable to answer. On a wet gravel driveway in Newport, on the evening of the 7th of October 1966, the question reached its breaking point. A man bent over a gate. A car moved 15 feet. A line ended. She lived for 27 more years. She built 5 mansions she could not stay in. She married 3 men she could not love. She adopted 1 daughter she could not keep. And she died alone, weighing 76 pounds, with a butler at her bed who could not read the will he had inherited. This was the richest girl in the world. Drive south on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island today. You will pass the Breakers, the Vanderbilt's 70-room palace, opened to public tours in 1948. You will pass Marble House, Alva Vanderbilt's wedding gift to her daughter, who hated it. You will pass Rosecliff, where Jay Gatsby was filmed in 1974. And then, just past the bend where Bellevue Avenue narrows toward the ocean, you will see a wrought iron gate. The gate has been replaced. It is not the same gate that broke under the front bumper of a Dodge Polara on the 7th of October 1966. The replacement gate is identical in design, Doris Duke insisted, in 1967, that the new gate be cast from the same foundry, in the same pattern, by the same craftsman. She wanted to drive past her own crime scene every time she came home. Beyond the gate, set back from the road on a granite cliff above the Atlantic, is the house called Rough Point. It was built in 1889 by Frederick W. Vanderbilt. Doris's father bought it for her mother in 1922 for $1.5 million. Doris inherited it in 1962. She lived there, on and off, for the last 31 years of her life. The Newport Restoration Foundation, established and funded by Doris Duke in 1968, opened Rough Point to the public as a museum on the 1st of April 2000. If you take the tour, the docent will walk you through the morning room, where Doris and Eduardo took breakfast on the 7th of October 1966. The docent will walk you through the rose garden Eduardo redesigned in 3 colors. The docent will walk you, eventually, to the front portico, where the docent will stop and turn and point down the gravel driveway toward the wrought iron gate. The docent does not say what happened there. You can stand on the portico. You can see the gate. The driveway is exactly 300 yards long. You can do the math yourself. So we return, one final time, to the question we asked in the cold open. How does a woman with 5 mansions, 3 yachts, and a private jet finish her life unable to name a single person who loves her? The answer, in the case of Doris Duke, is not complicated. She was given, at the age of 12, a fortune that no human being is psychologically equipped to absorb. She was told, on the same day, by the only man who had ever loved her, never to trust anyone. She lost the daughter who would have made the inheritance bearable. She killed the friend who would have made the loneliness survivable. And she lived for 27 years inside the consequences of an 8-second decision she made alone, in the driver's seat of a station wagon, on a wet gravel driveway, at 5:07 the afternoon, on the 7th day of October, 1966. The fortune is still here. It funds Islamic art preservation. It funds child welfare. It funds the medical research that, ironically, may now extend the lives of women like Doris by another 20 years. The woman is not here. The line is closed. The 1939 Cecil Beaton photograph in Vogue. Black silk, direct stare, no smile. You now know why she was not smiling. She was 26 years old. She was 4 months from the bed rest order at Doctor's Hospital. She was 8 months from the cesarean section. She was 8 months from the 24 hours she would hold her daughter Arden. She was 8 months from the sealed yellow nursery on the 3rd floor of the Manhattan mansion. And she was, in some part of herself that had already done the arithmetic, 27 years from a wrought iron gate in Newport. She knew. She did not know that she knew, but she knew. That is what is in the eyes of the photograph. That is why Cecil Beaton, who photographed every famous woman of his era, would later tell Vanity Fair in 1972 that of all the subjects he ever shot, Miss Duke was the only one who frightened me. The fortune was $400 million at the founder's death. It is $2 billion today. The line is closed. Eduardo Tirella is buried in the Holy Cross Cemetery in Dover, New Jersey. His grave is unmarked except for his name and the dates 1900 and 21,966. The richest girl in the world is buried at sea.